This video shows you how to set up and run a paper chromatography experiment. The equipment required is a ruler, a sharp pencil, a strip of chromatography paper, a wooden splint and paper clip, a capillary tube, your solvent, which is deionized water, a beaker, and the sample dye. Begin by taking your chromatography paper and fit it to the beaker, using scissors to trim it if you need. The paper needs to be long enough so that it can hang over the wooden splint without touching the bottom of the glass. Using the ruler and pencil, measure about 1 centimeter up from the bottom of the chromatography paper and draw a horizontal line across the paper using the pencil. This line is your start line where the sample will be added. Next, add about 1 centimeter depth of water solvent into the beaker. The water level must be below the pencil line on your chromatography paper, so you should check it by hanging your paper on the outside of the beaker. Here you can see that not enough water has been added. And now the water level is high enough. Using the capillary spotter, add a small drop sample of ink onto the pencil line on your chromatography paper. You should gently dot the capillary spotter onto the paper, repeating if you need until the ink dot is large enough. You don't want a huge drop or it will make it harder to take your measurements at the end. Too small of a drop will make it difficult to see. Once you've added your droplet onto the pencil line, you can hang the paper back onto the wooden splint and place it in the beaker of water. Remember that the water level must be below the pencil line. The water solvent begins to travel up the paper. Now the solvent has reached the ink spot, the ink begins to move too. Notice how the ink spreads out into a streak. This is why it was important to use a small drop to begin with. Leave the paper in the water solvent until the solvent has travelled up through the chromatography paper to about 2 centimeters from the wooden splint. This gives enough time for the ink to be transported up the paper, but not too long for the water to travel completely to the top. Carefully remove the chromatography paper from the water solvent. You can see that the water has travelled further up the page than the ink. When you remove the paper from the beaker, you might need to leave it overnight to completely dry. Write your name in pencil at the top of the paper. Once the paper is completely dry, you can now mark the chromatogram in pencil and take the measurements using a ruler. First, mark with pencil the highest point the water solvent reached. You can see that the ink has spread out into a streak. Here is the top of the streak. However, we need to measure from the middle. The middle is where the colour is most intense. Now you've marked your chromatogram with pencil, you can take the measurements from the pencil line. You will need to know the distance the water travelled and the distance to the centre of the ink. You will need to use these measurements to calculate the retention factor, or RF value. To do so, you divide the distance the ink travelled from the pencil line by the distance the water solvent travelled from the pencil line.